Hello and welcome to another episode of Talking TRM, the podcast dedicated to travel risk management. My name is Travel Risk Bex, and today my guest I have actually only met quite recently. So I am going to say he is a friend to be. We don't do acquaintances on this show, but this is what I love about this space. Not only is everyone that I've met so far been really welcoming, but it's just the way we kind of get to meet new people. And then suddenly you discover a whole other part that people have been working on that you didn't even sort of know about. And that's kind of the point of this show, is to bring this to the forefront, to remind people, if you're getting into travel risk management, don't have to start totally from scratch. There's some great stuff that's already been done. So this particular guest was introduced to me through one of my clients, who introduced me to the company that he's now working with. So with no further ado, I'd like to introduce Damian Taylor to the show. Damian, how are you?
All very well, thanks, Bex. All the better for
Good.
seeing you.
Thank you. It's good to see you. And thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate that. Well, I know exactly what you're going to be doing after this show. So you're going to be having some downtime with your son, which is fantastic. But I don't want to keep you for too long. So we'll crack on. Damien, if you could introduce yourself to our listeners by telling us who you are and what is it that you do.
Thanks, Bex. And yeah, so my name is Damian Taylor, and I'm currently an independent travel risk management consultant. Really, my passion for travel risk management started many years ago, before it was even a phrase. I left the military, British Army, back in 1995. And started leading really remote expeditions for a small gap year company called Trek Force. Um, and we were really doing some pretty remote, um, out there type stuff through rainforest in Indonesia, Malaysia, Belize. And I don't mean just on the fringes of national parks. We were going in doing some pretty remote work, often 2 to 3 days walk, boat, from the nearest center of habitation, and with that the nearest center of medical support. um,
Yeah.
and obviously a key consideration when we were doing this, we were taking gap year kids. These were fantastic people, but we had a duty of care for them, and this is, again, we understood that duty of care for people who were effectively put into our protection. So we had to cover off every angle, and I'm not talking, dramatic snake bitey type stuff. It wasn't that. It's your standard, burns, trips, breaks, but we'd still need to get people out of the forest or the jungle. So back in the day, a lot of that was done by the insurers, but it was down to you to actually, we understood that we had to get them to the center of the nearest center of medical excellence. And back then we were using AIG, who in turn had a medical assistance provider, AEA, Asia Emergency Assistance, especially for our Indonesian expeditions. AEA, then further down the line, that was a baby embryonic international SOS. Um,
Wow.
so, so it really, this was way back, sort of 95, when medical and security assistance was really in its embryonic stages. But we understood that we really needed to, yeah, we needed to pay for things. So that's where the insurance came in. But then understanding, the hospitals, the care, the transport systems, that's where AEA came in. But at the heart of it, and I guess this is again where my passion for location services, tracking, I mean, tracking's a bad word, but location services. If something happened, people had to know where we were, and that included the team that was covering off, doing the support back in the UK, and the team on the ground had to be able to give a precise location. So to overcome this, we used to carry, me as an expedition leader, we carried what was called an EPIRB, an emergency position indicating radio beacon. And I kid you not, the first ones that we were using, they were ship transponders that we carried in our
Wow,
rucksacks. And I'm talking,
heavy,
they're
heavy.
about that size plus all the kit that you were having to carry. And what happened there was if you had to activate the beacon, you pulled a pin on it, it sent a signal up to a satellite, which came down somewhere in Southampton um, to a 24/7 office there or control room. The alert would go off and they would go, it's EPIRB such and such, this is the latitude, the longitude, this is the emergency number to call. And they would call one of us, typically 2 o'clock in the morning. You're in bed and it's your home phone number. Mobile phones were pretty much coming in, so the duty mobile would go off. But all you had was a latitude and a longitude, and you knew something had happened. You didn't
Yeah,
know what had happened, you couldn't communicate with them. So you had to rely on really, really tight procedures that once the EPIRB was activated, you knew that they would be moving to the next emergency spot. And then we would start, if it wasn't me on the ground, if it was me back in the OPSEN or providing the support, would then start to put in motion the insurers, warning them off that something had happened, calling AEA to say, we're aware of something, so they could start activating. So, so really, things went on. The exciting bit. A couple of years later, another EPIRB came out, but it was a bit smaller, but still a heavy bit of kit. And I guess I spent a decade or so within the remote expeditions industry. I set my own little company up in Indonesia, training expedition leaders to
fantastic.
run safe expeditions for the likes of World Challenge, Rally, Trek Force. They come to me. It was all backed by the Royal Geographical Society because back then there was no regulation. You could lead
No,
an expedition to these remote places with no qualifications at all, other than seem
yeah,
sensible, or they may have a mountain leader um, certificate. So it was that whole location services, regulation, policies, standards for people to follow, and really since the 90s, the mid 90s, leading up to 2005. Um, it, it it was only when bad stuff happened that people really paid attention. If there was a fatality, um, and I guess I was based on a little island in Indonesia. I had my own little training company. We then had two children, and candidly, I had to grow up and leave our little island. My kids needed to go to proper schools and to put shoes on rather than running around naked and barefoot. So I came back and joined Control Risks in 2005. Again, it was an exciting period. There was quite a lot going on, and travel risk management was very much in its infancy. To most clients we spoke to, it was a matter of, but we're not working in Iraq or Afghanistan. We don't need travel risk management. It's fine. Don't worry. We don't need guns and gates and armored vehicles.
we've got our
Um,
TMC. We've got our travel management company. They're taking care of that bit, sort of thing.
Absolutely. Or we've got membership of one of, whether it was International SOS or I think
Yeah,
it was ASI or, all
yeah.
these organizations. All we do is we call them and the Black Hawks come in and
It's all
take
fine.
us out of there. Um, and really, I then went over to the joint venture between International SOS and Control Risks, which again was groundbreaking. The two organizations came together having identified that there was a requirement for both medical assistance and security assistance,
Yeah.
and that they should be blended. So that was 2009, and people were still, we and countless others were pushing the message of duty of care, travel risk management, and there were a lot of really good white papers out there, that that articulated duty of care, that articulated travel risk management, said what it was about, but there wasn't really that appetite. People still had that, yeah, but we've got membership, or we've got our insurers, we've got our TMC. Um, and then the Arab Spring happened in 2011, and really that was a catalyst that really set a flame under organizations. You had the likes of Libya, and I was intimately familiar with this because I was the regional security director at the joint venture between International SOS and Control Risks. And it was my region that was going up in flames. So we were deploying incident management
Wow.
teams, we were pulling clients out. And you look at the likes of Libya. Libya went from a low risk destination. The highest risk there was the road systems, and it went from low to extreme and full evacuation within a week. So a lot of organizations were caught on the hop.
Yeah.
And and bear in mind the whole Arab Spring, when you had Tunisia, then you had Egypt, then you had Libya, then you had the likes of Bahrain, you had Syria. It was a real time of turmoil, and a lot of organizations were working in all of these countries.
Yeah.
So we went from one crisis to another. And key to the question was, we were like, where are your people? And the majority would go, we don't know.
We
Libya,
don't
for
know.
instance, didn't have named roads. So in order to identify where people were and communicate with them, you know, communication systems had gone down. Funnily enough, for Libya, we could still use BlackBerry Messenger, but mobile networks went down,
Yeah.
um, landlines went down. We were back to, when they were working, back to using faxes. Um, you know,
Wow.
it it
Wow.
it it was a crazy time.
Yeah.
Um, and don't forget, the Christchurch earthquake happened during that period, and
Yeah.
Fukushima. So you had multiple crises plus your business as usual. Companies were still sending travelers out and about. So, so really, it was, where? How do you find your people? And back then, there were, you know, pretty rudimentary travel tracking systems that most of the providers had, but they were all dependent on TMC data. So it was static data. You knew that they were
Mm.
in a country, but you had no idea really where they were. They could have landed in London, and bearing in mind, it's not just hostile environments or high risk environments. Bad stuff happens everywhere. And what I always say in terms of preparation for organizations, a bit like the Boy Scouts motto, better to know and not need than to need and not know. So preparation is absolutely critical. Um, and on the back of the Arab Spring, a lot of soul searching was conducted. So, a lot of companies were calling me. I was, carpeted and put in front of companies and told, where were your Black Hawks? And it doesn't work like that. At the heart of it, an organization has to do its own preparation and planning. They have to have their internal procedures. They have to communicate those procedures as well. Um, so that's where it really started to get traction, and people really got the message that if you're sending people on business travel overseas anywhere, and also following on from the Arab Spring, you then had the events of 2014, the terror attacks in London, Paris, Berlin. You had all of these incidents happening, um, and at the heart of it, you had to know if you've been impacted. So that's where, you know, technology moved on as well. You got there then the sort of app-based tracking. I was there at the forefront while we were testing the likes of Vismo with their live tracking. So how could we provide active monitoring for clients sending people out who had this duty of care and wanted to be able to identify where they were if something happened? so they could do something about it. And in addition to knowing where they were, being able to communicate with them. So it's all around the preparation, the procedures. Um, in 2014, we were then looking at, bearing in mind this is when I was with International SOS, who were very, very heavily engaged with BSI around bringing out a standard or a specification that was independent, that wasn't like all the white papers, which basically said, these are the elements of travel risk management, and this is what duty of care is. By the way, we provide them. Here we are, come and talk to us. And PAS 3001 came together as a part of all of these different white papers. And the great thing about it was, it was a publicly available specification. You couldn't certify to it, but you could adhere to it, because it
Yeah.
wasn't just organizations with their duty of care, but the travelers having that duty of loyalty back to the organization.
Yeah.
Um, and what the PAS did was, it wasn't a dark art. It demystified that whole travel risk management. It was independent, and it just said this in very easy stages is what travel risk management is about. And with judicious use of your insurers, your travel management companies, um, your assistance providers if need be, a really clear travel security policy. So most people have travel security, but it's sort of tucked in amongst if you're at this level of an organization and above, you can go in the pointy end and the posh bit of the airplane. And
Yeah.
if you're below that, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So the PAS, I left International SOS in 2015 to set up my own little travel risk management consultancy, tenure risk management. And I've spent the past 8 years or so working with organizations from small little NGOs through to, the big four, benchmarking them, looking where they're at, advising them, but also working for the providers within that space as well, doing a lot of consulting work, which has given me an insight into how far the industry's come. And with the publishing in 2021 of ISO 31010, I call it 31030. Some people call it 31030. You know,
So many
it's out
different
there.
versions. It doesn't matter. It's
Yeah.
there. It's fine.
Um, and it's great, and it's on its way to becoming a fully certifiable standard, which is fabulous news. And what I've seen is a huge number of organizations, and I'm currently, benchmarking they want to be able to one, reassure their travelers, and two, reassure the board that they're doing everything in their power. And and the ISO does that very, very succinctly. It's not some big tome that'll send you to sleep. Very, very clear guidelines. And at the heart of it, it's about preparing you as an organization to travel, preparing your travelers to travel, having a source of information. So pre-travel advisories, which are all tied into itineraries, advising them or informing them if something's happened or might impact them, um, being able to advise them, tell them what to do. If something's happened, this is what you need to do, and provide the reassurance. And worst case scenario, having the capability to respond. And at the heart of that, something goes off, it's in the news or you receive an alert. The first thing that goes through my mind or would, have we been impacted? Do we have somebody there? And technology's been moving apace. It's really,
Yeah.
it's stupendous what it can do. And it's also that whole right to privacy. In the early days, people didn't want to be tracked, or um, so you had that. You could provide the means, but it was up to the traveller to actually go, yeah, I'm happy for my data to be shared. But nowadays, you're tracked by WhatsApp, Facebook. TrackMy for everything. You're tracked all the way through. But this is more about location services. And I guess as far as technology, one organization out there, and I'll be candid, I'm working with them at the moment, a company called Track24, who've been in the industry for a long time. You know, in the early days, back in the sort of mid 2014, in fact before that, 2009, 2010, it was very much around satellite tracking
Yeah.
and platforms and 24/7 GSOCs in hostile environments, the likes of
Yeah.
Iraq and Afghanistan and so on. Um, but but really the requirement is it's not about just traveler location, it's all staff. It's all well and good, you know, having your travelers in London and knowing where they are, but nowadays with hybrid working, that duty
Yeah.
of care extends to people like me, you know, at the moment working at home, like yourself, Bex. Um,
Agreed.
and and bad stuff does happen. Um, and if for the chances of being impacted are really quite small, but it provides that reassurance. If you're able to go, something's happened, geofence an area, and this is what Track24 with Atlas NXT can do. They can geofence an area, and even if somebody has decided they don't want to be tracked, if there is an immediate threat to life and the policies and procedures are in place and that the employees have agreed that in these circumstances I'm happy to be located, then the app can be activated remotely, again, in very clearly legally defined and agreed as well. Um, and you can find people, you can advise them what to do. Um, it so technology, embrace technology combined with really, really tight policies and then procedures to underline them as well. And they don't have to be complicated. Keep them simple because people have to read them. You don't want to send them to sleep. They've still got to um, read them and clearly understand them, know what to do in the event that something happens. It really, you know, it's out there. Technology, it just has to be embraced, and the word is spreading. And you know, thanks to podcasts such as yourselves, Bex, and really this diaspora of people now, organizations have developed their own travel security teams, travel risk
Yeah.
management teams,
Yeah.
um, and the people recruited into them come from a variety of industries, but they understand travel risk management intimately, whether they come from TMCs, insurers, whether they come from the assistance providers, um, and we can have grown-up conversations with them that aren't, you know, a black art. It's very, very simple. But at the end of the day, there are the tools there for organizations to provide that duty of care, look after their people, and realize it's not just about travelers. It's all staff. It's all staff location. Uh, there is the um, the technical capability through you know phones um, to do this, and they're also they're they used to be very expensive. You know, it was all around satellite phones and satellite this. Actually, there are really cost-effective solutions, and that's what attracted me to Track24 was I've seen their technology, and it really, really is cutting edge. I know there's others out there. You know, I'm not going to big up one against the other, but they're out there. Embrace them. Sorry, I've rattled on a fair bit, but
It was amazing, Damien. Do you know what? I never get to actually just listen to someone. And I think when I first met you, I was like, oh my goodness, I just need to get this man on the show because he's going, well, you've just done it so beautifully. You've just taken us on a journey from, the 90s and how this whole piece has grown. And what is shown me all the way through that is your passion and your drive and kind of why you're interested in this space. So you haven't rattled on. You just taught us so much. So thank you. But I think any of our listeners listening will understand exactly why I wanted to get you on. So firstly, it, this is a space that has been there for a long time. It's very easy to think it was kind of high risk destination or high risk location or combat sort of activities or that kind of thing. But actually, it's been there for ages, and there's companies that have been operating in this space for a very long time, and for good reason. There's so much that you just talked about that I want to go over, and all this stuff's going through my head now. So I want to just talk about. I want to go back to the mountain stuff, and some of the stuff that you. Sorry, not the mountain stuff. The stuff that you were doing in Indonesia and some of that remote stuff. Because I think what I really want to hit home hard in the last few minutes that we've got is this pre-planning piece. Because I think this is going to be one of your golden nuggets, anyway. Um, if I should be so bold. Um, but I just obviously you had this sort of situation where you were aware of who the assistance company was, who the insurance company was, but what I was listening to and hearing through that, you were also aware of your responsibilities and that you needed a plan of action. You needed to know what happened. So as the organization responsible, that's what you were doing. How were you putting that stuff together, and how were you finding out information about that sort of stuff back then? What were your tips around that? I really want to drill into that if you don't mind, Damien.
Yeah, it's a lot of it was around SOPs, so our
Okay.
standard operating procedures, and
Yeah.
back in the sort of 80s and 90s, a lot of us in that space were ex-military,
Yeah.
and we lived and breathed SOPs. You know, you had to have an SOP for
Everything.
situations, for
Yeah.
everything. And what we would do, certainly, so the expedition season would typically start in the summer after uh, the kids have finished school or university. Um, and we'd already identified the expeditions, we knew where we were going, we got the local partners. Um, and and like you say, it's about planning. So we'd already sent the recce's in, we'd already been in, and key to it was recceing reconnaissance of the site, but it was getting there and it was getting out as well. What providers were available? I mean, in one instance, we actually evacuated a young lad on an ox cart along a sandy
Wow.
beach. It was the quickest
Yeah.
way to get him out,
Yeah.
and we had him. He basically some fishermen. We were doing a turtle hatchery. We were building a turtle hatchery down in southern Sumatra, and unbeknownst to us, that some fishermen had had a fire on the beach. And at the end of a hot, sweaty day, it was quite nice to walk down to the beach, go in the sea, have a bit of a wash down. And this young lad was barefoot. We had quite literally said, you wear something on your feet at all
Yeah.
times.
Yeah.
So that had already been addressed. And what he didn't realize, it was still light. It was coming towards dusk, but you couldn't see the glow of the charcoal. And he stepped straight on the fire, which was still absolutely red hot.
Wow.
And to make
Oh my
matters
goodness.
worse, he stumbled forward and put his hands in. Um, Immediately, we sprinted at him and chucked him in the sea.
Mm.
The sea was just nearby. We chucked him in the sea, kept him there. But in terms of planning, every expedition had two doctors and two nurses and two fully comprehensive medical kits, which included burns kit, antibiotics, IV fluids. We really were a very, very self-contained. So that was our first point of emergency healthcare, was actually on the site itself. Um, and it had been planned out. So on the recce, we'd identified that the site was remote. How were we going to get out? One way was motorbike through the jungle
Hmm.
on little 125 motorbikes. But then we thought, what if the casualty is incapacitated and cannot handle, um,
Yeah.
can't walk, and cannot sit, because it's pretty damned uncomfortable going up and down jungle tracks on
Yeah.
a little motorbike. So we identified a local village, and they did everything by ox and cart. They carry their rice in, their stocks, their supplies, and they use the beach as a
Better.
road.
Yeah.
So that's how we got him out. But going back to your question, Bex, um, it was all around preparation, and then we'd sit around the table and we'd risk assess every single project site to death. And it wouldn't just be pulling out the old template. It would be right. This is specific to this site and these people, and we'd have a good few days of planning with all of the expedition leaders who'd be going to Belize or Sumatra, Kalimantan or wherever, and we'd sit down and we'd war game everything, and then we would work on the what if and how
Yeah.
do we do this? How do we achieve this? So first of all, how do we prevent it happening in the first place? So thorough briefings, thorough training, um, experienced leaders and medical staff, um, training up trainee leaders coming through, shadowing the expedition leaders, um, and then practice, test, test, test. So, plan, test, test, test. And it goes back to the old military adage, train hard, fight easy. It really is that, because once you've got that slick procedure and everyone knows what to do, it all clicks into place. And the same can be transferred into the corporate space. You've got a plan and you've got a test and you've got to communicate. And then, with the right tools in place, you've done everything you can do.
I agree, and I think obviously it's so new to the corporate space, isn't it? Especially this idea of all travel, all people, anywhere. This is the bit that everyone's a bit like, I can't quite get my head around how we're going to control this and what we're going to do. But I think what I've learned from you today. Well, I've learned a lot from you today. But the bit that I kind of is looking back at some of these adventure travel companies. They had a reason to obviously make sure that these trips were secure, right? So whether you're taking gap students out, which is a completely different thing to whether you're taking adults out, or I worked for a company called Explore. That was my
Mm.
kind of first thing into
Yep.
adventure travel. And the stuff that, the recce's that those guys did, the ops team was just huge. And this again was kind of back in the 90s, early 2000s. So way before the kind of slick communications that we have now, and someone had the ops mobile. But what we did every year is we did a practice. And that was across the whole company. So we knew that an emergency call would come in we knew which week it would come in, but we didn't know anything other than that. And then we would all go into this piece. But that's because previously they'd had a horrendous situation and actually had learned the hard way that you needed to practice these things, because they realized then the media attention and all this other stuff that can happen when an event happens. And it was news breaking. It was horrendous. So the next 15 to 20 years, they just made that process even better. And I think there's just so much to learn from those guys. But we can take that down to sort of our personal travel and what we should be doing. There's so much emphasis at this point on the company getting stuff right, but we've got to remember that as the traveller, we've got to do that for ourselves as well. So even if you are going to somewhere that you think is a low risk destination, as you've brightly said, and I say it's my mantra constantly, anything can happen at any time, any place, to anyone. You should be doing some prep. You should be doing some kind of knowing the area that you're staying, checking out the property, understanding if you as a person and the way that you live is going to cause you additional risk by going to a place, that's not the company's responsibility. It's the company's responsibility to support you through that, but you also have to be aware of it um and take responsibility yourself. So this piece of planning is just it's just so essential, and that's why really there's so much we could have gone back over, and there's so much I did want to talk about. I really wanted to draw into this because where I come from, in the travel world, it feels like the travel starts at the point the booking is made, and it doesn't. And we try and squeeze in all these approval processes and all this other stuff around that. Really, all of that should have taken place a month or so, two
Yeah.
months, 3 months, depending on what it is you're doing beforehand. But we're in this place now of instant purchase, got to do things quickly. We're making these assumptions that everything will be okay or someone else is looking after it for us. How do we change that? How do we, and I don't know if you have the answer to this, Damien, but I'm going to throw it to you anyway. This will be our closing question for people, but how do we kind of put the emphasis on the fact that we maybe need to move where we start the planning piece and actually make this important for all travel? What's some of your recommendations around that?
Yeah, I think we're moving towards it, but I'm still shocked by the lack of preparedness um,
Me too.
in big organisations
Yeah.
that have been impacted. So I guess it's a bit like water on stone. It's more and more um, travel risk management practitioners out there pushing the message. It's getting out there, but it's not far enough. I like I say, I'm shocked when I hear of the situations people have got, organisations have got into, but also the frustration shared with me by the TRM practitioners within those organisations, because at the end of the day, when bad stuff happens and you haven't prepared for it, it's the board who are saying, sorry, my lud, we haven't done anything. And my lud is going, but there is all this stuff out there that you could have been doing to prevent that bad thing
Yeah.
happening.
Yeah.
Um, it really is. It's that serious.
Yeah.
So water on stone, and hopefully it'll push through, and it'll just become part of a company's DNA in the same way that they've got their financial controls and so on, because it impacts their bottom line. Actually, stuff like this can negatively impact an organization's bottom line, no matter the size or the reach.
I fully agree with you. I mean, the worst type of situation could literally bring a company down, couldn't it, if they're not prepared for this? With social media as it is today, with the way we can connect and share stuff, and it just, I just have to agree with you. It surprises me as well. And actually, even sort of sometimes when they're going to high risk countries, there's a lot of reliance and assumption, I think, on suppliers. The bit that I think has been forgotten is the responsibility of the company putting their policies, processes. But like you, I see a massive change. I see, it used to be the CFO that had the ear of the CEO. Now it's maybe the CCO, or you're seeing CSOs kind of in that position. It tends to be those companies that have had an experience, unfortunately, perhaps a negative one, that start moving a little bit faster in this space. Or a personal experience, I've noticed, if a CEO or someone on the exec teams had some traumatic event happen to them, they get it, and there's no expense spared in getting this right, because it's about people risk management and they get it. But there's a whole other wealth of companies out there, and I think, although SMEs, let's talk about them briefly, are aware of this too, because it totally affects them. It affects every company. It affects me as a one person band, or yourself.
Yeah,
um this isn't just the job of the big corporates. We can all take responsibility of this at our own level. So even those SMEs working with big corporates need to start thinking about this and getting the stuff in place. And as I've said hundreds of times, it's a lot easier when you're smaller and there's maybe 5 travelers going to 5 countries than there is when you've got 22,000 travelers, or whatever it is that these big corporates are doing. So it's a good sort of time to start early. um
100%.
Leave us
I was
your
just
final word of wisdom, Damien, before we stop. I knew this would be a good one, and I knew we'd learn a lot. So thank you so much. But yes, how would you like to close the show?
It goes back to what I said. Plan, 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 test, test, test. The tools are out there. Go to the ISO, and this is especially pointed at SMEs as well, who don't necessarily have the budget for an expensive membership or anything like that. There are the tools in there that, with judicious use of your insurer or your TMC, they all have information sources, they all have um, location services, even though they're not live. And if you've got a small enough traveling population, you can support them.
Yeah,
Um, so plan, 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 test, 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 and educate, train, train, train.
beautiful. Damien, it's been an absolute pleasure. I told you it would go fast. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for all of your tips. I love it when I get to stay quiet, and our guest is just so experienced and confident in their craft that they can just take the show. And I mean that with respect. I honestly do. I love it. It's because I get to sit back and learn so much. So I'm grateful for your time today. But I want you to go and enjoy some time with your son now. Even though this is going to come out in the winter, it's the summer, and you're about to go paddle boarding. So that's very exciting. Um,
Well, I'm about to take him to Kenya in a couple of
oh,
weeks to do
that's even
some
more
remote travel.
exciting.
So I've been doing all of my travel risk management planning and preparation for that.
You
So
see,
I
we
have
should even
precious
do it.
cargo.
We should even do it for our leisure holidays, especially when we're traveling with family, right? It's, it's on you. Ultimately, it's the parent. Damien, thank you. I actually want to get you on for another show another time, and I'm just sorry that we've run out of time today. But I think everyone will love it. Everyone leave their feedback as normal, and we will get Damien on for another show should you want to. Um, Thank you for everyone who's listening. You've been listening to Talking TRM. My name is Travel Risk Bex. My guest today, Damian Taylor, independent travel risk management consultant, guru, who I will just learn from now on. Join us in another couple of weeks for another episode. In the meantime, please take care of yourselves, take care of your people, and we'll see you soon. Thank you. Bye.